Okay, so get that started. So yeah, thanks for being here. My name is Dr. Marty Trommer Cabrera. I am the Assistant Director for Outreach in the Counseling Psychological Services Center, or what we call CAPS. So we'll be talking today about stress management. In the chat, I'll pose some questions. Feel free to use that. We're a smaller group, so you can also unmute yourself and just share as we go through the presentation today as well. I have the QR code up there. If you are interested in submitting questions anonymously, you can do that, and the question will come through the form that was sent out earlier. And that way, in case you want to remain anonymous with your questions, then there's an avenue to do that. So if you want to just scan that, so you have the page up, that way I can answer the questions as we go through here. All right, so the goals for today's session are going to be to identify, your own stress responses, recognize just kind of like common grad school stressors, gain some skills to address that stress, and then of course know resources. And the way that we're going to go through that is just by discussing some of the cues, papers, advisors, life, how you cope right now, how to really hone in on things like motivation, focus, and getting the rest that you need. And then of course, digging into some of those services and resources like I discussed. So one thing that's important to know, as a therapist, and in a lot of therapy that we do is one-on-one, as you might already know about counseling. And so what happens in therapy is important to do one-on-one because everybody's experience is very, very unique. We're all human, so we share different reactions and experiences, but really it's important. And I think what I'm going to ask people to do during this time is to really reflect on their own stress. And sometimes, especially if you're a researcher, which you probably are if you're in grad school, our brain likes to put things in categories. And so to help kind of facilitate that reflection, I'm going to go through a little bit of different ways to think about your stress. So I have here on the screen acute stress, episodic stress, and chronic stress. And so as you're thinking about and reflecting on your own stress reactions, I welcome you to share any of those in the chat if you know about them already. But to really, as you're reflecting, think about things like what sort of acute stressors do you have in your life? I like to give the examples of things, like driving in Houston, that can be stressful. It's not necessarily something that's might, like push us over the edge in and of itself, but that would be an acute stress, if you're driving through traffic and how far your commute might be. Anything related to presentations is a very common one that comes up for people across the board, that kind of like stressful feeling that you get before you have to stand in front of a group of people to present some information or kind of like show that you know what you're talking about. Some acute stress can come from that. Acute stress can also come from, just having a hard feedback session with one of your advisors, or, a lab project that didn't go the way that you anticipated it would, or in the direction that you had hoped. So acute stress like that is good to just kind of be aware of, knowing your reactions can be super helpful. So the next category in terms of episodic stress is something that usually comes up for grad students, because this is the time when you're really filling up your plate. Grad school is a challenge. I think that if somebody told you that, oh yeah, go to grad school, it was easy, they were lying to you, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because through challenges we grow, for sure. But in grad school, we're really figuring out, what does a full plate look like, and when are things like really starting to fall off and I'm not feeling like I can manage this, right? So like consistently getting negative feedback, or like having missed deadlines and things like that kind of cues us into, okay, maybe I'm not managing things, or maybe there's a better way of doing this. Maybe my stress is getting in the way of me being effective. So episodic stress, thinking about that, and if you've been in grad school for a little while, you probably have experienced this, especially like in the adjustment into grad school. So if anybody's willing to share their reactions, definitely welcome that in the chat. Having gone through grad school myself, I think that, reflecting on some of that could be things like isolation. It could be things like, maybe some of that unhealthy coping in regards to like consumption of substances or food, things like that, where you kind of start noticing that, okay, I'm avoiding things that I need to, and I, kind of getting back to feeling like things are manageable. And then another type of stress that's important for you to think about and reflect on for yourself is where chronic stress comes from. And usually chronic stress develops out of situations that are beyond our control. And so if, the examples here obviously being things like if, people didn't grow up in poverty or in a war-torn country, or childhood traumas, or racism, right, in America. And so things like that, if that type of thing has happened in your life, then it's good to reflect on when that comes up and when that's impacting you. Because most of the time, if you've experienced something like chronic stress, it's going to impact how you react to stressful situations in your life now. And so just being aware of that within yourself can be super helpful, right? Because it kind of gives us this, like it says here, a heightened need to protect ourselves, or to like, make sure that we're okay, which sometimes can be an overcompensation than what we want. So it's really important to reflect on, what your acute stressors are, when things are getting overwhelming, and then for sure, if there's some chronic stressors that have happened in your life already, and how those are going to impact you now. So in terms of, just in general, this is not an exhaustive list, but the type of effects, of these stressors can be things like emotional, muscular distress, or things like cardiovascular distress. And so as you're reflecting on just your own stress cues, I think it's important to really think about when these come up. And the reflection part, I know I'm biased because I'm a therapist, but I think it's pretty important because that allows you to know when to intervene, and early intervention is better, right, than getting to the point of like, they say like a mental breakdown, as people refer to it, or an anxiety attack or something like that. And so if we begin to understand our own stress cues, then we can say, hey, wait a second, let me do something right here and right now, so that this doesn't build on top of the stress that I already have. And so these are just some examples. Like I said before, it's not an exhaustive list. I can tell you that when I'm working in therapy with students, I'll try and point these out to people. And I think that you can ask people that you're close to point these out to you. So sometimes when I'm in session, I see clients doing something like this, as they're talking about something, or rubbing their neck. Or sometimes, there's that here, it's like a gut or bowel problems, like, oh my, I don't feel good in my stomach, or there's a heaviness in my chest. These sorts of things are really good cues just to know about yourself. Nail biters, that's another one too. Or the hair twirling, I hear a lot about. But these are really good things to know about yourself, to cue in. It's easier to cue into things like muscular reactions, or something that's tangible, than it is to, more emotional stuff, because we don't feel it with our senses as much. So continue to reflect on what those cues are, and begin to recognize them. Ask other people, like I said, that are close to you for help in recognizing that. Sometimes people are giving us that feedback, like, whoa, Marty, you look really tired today. And, it might not be something good to hear in the moment, but that's a cue. That's a cue to you to say, okay, this is where I'm at. Let me, see if I can de-stress a little bit, or, do something that's going to help me regain some of that energy and focus that I might need to continue through my day, or get done whatever I need to get done, right? So if you haven't already, note those things to yourself, and come back to that as you kind of go through your day, especially during those stressful times that'll be coming up towards the latter half of this semester. All right, so in kind of reflecting on your stress reactions, I think what's really important to do beyond those areas that I talked about is to acknowledge some of the natural stress that comes with being in grad school. And so when you think about grad school, these kind of like larger contexts, you're in grad school, and in this culture of the United States and academia, where there is a lot of emphasis on what we call like meritocracy, right? There's this culture in the United States about like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and the first thing that people ask you is, what do you do? And a lot of times you're reflecting on what your GPA is or how many publications you have. So it's kind of like we're in this culture that's based on merit, and so the more awards you have, the more publications you have, the kind of like better person you're deemed to be. And so that is a culture that I think is very, very much worth acknowledging, because it also brings up something that's natural for all of us, but this idea of comparison and envy, and comparing and contrasting ourselves to other people, which is very natural thing for us to do. But in the culture of grad school in the United States, it's really brought to life. And I think that that's an important thing to acknowledge, because it can get you into these spaces where you're really feeling down about yourself. And I think that the other thing related to grad school stress is that you do get a lot of critical feedback. And there is an expectation of high performance. And so being able to hear that and be persistent despite some of the negative feedback you get can be incredibly important. And so if you all are willing to, I'm curious in the chat or to unmute to say a little bit more about any of the coping that you might use right now to address some of these stressors, because inevitably you're going to get pulled back into, oh, I wonder if I'm going to get first author on this, or I wonder if I'm going to pass this test or get the grade that I need to. A lot of those thoughts will come up. Sometimes they can be helpful and motivating, but other times you get stuck on it. And I'm curious about what people are using to kind of get out of that mode if it's not something that's productive for you. So, and then I can obviously share some coping that I think can be helpful. And I've listed it here in some ways on this slide. Some of the things that people do when they're stressed is to make to-do lists. It makes us feel like, okay, like I have control over what I need to get done because I can see it, right? And then I go through my list. So that sometimes is a good way of coping and kind of breaking things down into smaller pieces so that it feels like, hey, I can do this, right? Another very natural way of coping that, of course, therapists are all in favor of is crying. It's okay to be sad about things. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with you or wrong with your life. That especially in grad school, we're going to face some tough times and some tough feedback. And it's okay to cry about that. It's okay to be sad if things didn't go your way. And I think that what's really important is, kind of like how long you get stuck on that and how helpful that can be for you in the moment. And so reflecting on not only your stress reactions, but also how you're coping, and so the other thing that I know some people do to cope, which, like I said, it depends on how long you do it for, is things like procrastination, right? So one of the things on here, just let me just push that out of my mind. I'll get to it later. And then an hour before you have your one-on-one meeting with your advisor, you're, scrambling through things. And so avoidance is something that I think is very natural for us as human beings, because we don't really like things related to discomfort, or, so if something's really hard, then I might, shift away from that so I don't have to feel the discomfort, and so procrastination is something that I think inevitably we all have to find a way to address. For sure, if example here that came up is if English is your second language, right? And so for every presentation and or meeting that you have, stress comes with, how competent I am in communicating. It kind of, like I said before, getting back to this idea of comparison, other people don't have to go through this. It's like another layer of stress that might come with some of that. So understanding, if that's something that comes up with you, acknowledging what is and kind of how you manage that, right? So is it that you're practicing extra times before you do your presentation, running that by other people, and building confidence in that? So other coping that people have, let's check the chat real quick. All right. So other ways of coping, talking with other people, getting support. I'm going to offer more ways of coping, through resources later on. But one that I really want to highlight that I think is incredibly important and well researched is mindfulness. And so this is something that can be used pretty dynamically. Most times people have heard about mindfulness as it relates to things like meditation or yoga, but that's not necessarily what it has to be. Really, in its essence, it's just noticing what's going on moment to moment in your thoughts and your feelings without trying to judge it. And I think that this is really hard, and it pushes back very hard on grad school culture, because what do they always say? Think critically about things, think critically, which is great for academics and research. But when it comes to yourself and restoring the energy that you have to put into other things, thinking critically isn't always helpful. And so mindfulness, in the way that I'm going to talk about it today, is going to be helpful because, of course, our minds are trained to think of the past and rehash that, and that can be helpful in not making mistakes in the future, right? But what you'll notice is what our mind does is it wants to kind of like make sure. So you'll get stuck on that, or you go past that line, or you just keep thinking about something and how it didn't make you feel good, and it takes you away from where it brings your mood down in a way that's unhelpful for you in the moment when you really want to be directing that energy elsewhere. So you might get pulled to these things that in your past, because, well, your memory center is right next to your emotion center. So, you have a bad feeling, it brings up another bad feeling. And then soon you're thinking of, the time that you fell in front of the lunchroom in middle school and everybody laughed at you, things that you don't need to be thinking about right now. And so mindfulness is about acknowledging when you've gone past that line and bringing it back to the present moment, because our mind wants to make sure that we have control over things that, in the moment, it's what we have control over is just right then and right there. So our mind's saying, hey, make sure this doesn't happen again, make sure this doesn't happen again. And the way that we respond in a mindful way is by saying, hey, thanks for that reminder. I'm going to refocus on what's here and now, what's important to me, what I want to be about in this moment. Likewise, and probably more so for grad students, your mind gets pulled to the future, which is super helpful in planning, but we can go past the helpful line. And this is what mindfulness gets at, into the realm of what ifs, and what we call as therapists catastrophizing, right? So what if I don't graduate? What if my advisor, doesn't accept my dissertation? What if I don't get a TA-ship? All these things that in the moment can be unhelpful. Our brain, like I said, is very much trained to do that because it wants to have control over things. Hey, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. But really, mindfulness is about saying, hey, thanks for that reminder about what's important. And I'm going to refocus on what I really have control over right here and right now. So that's what mindfulness is all about. My long spiel to lead into doing a little bit of mindfulness practice here and now with y'all. So we have a lot of mindfulness resources on our website. And so I'll show that to you so that you kind of know where I'm getting this information on our CAPS website. And we're going to do just a real quick one. So here I'm going to share on our website, which is just uh.edu/CAPS. We have the resources, and we have, whoopsies, let me do the drop down there. And under resources, we have self-help. So what you'll notice here is that there's a lot of resources related to mindfulness. The ones I like to refer students to is the focus one. And so what you'll notice here is that a lot of times students say they don't have time, right, to go to a yoga session that's an hour long or do a 30-minute meditation. Mindfulness, in the way that I talk about it and the way I think it's most helpful, is to do it in quick spurts, because it's very much so kind of warming up your brain for focus skills or for reflection or any of these things that you might be interested in doing. So the one that I like is that we're going to do real quick right now is this 3-minute one. So if y'all give me 1 second, and I'll get that going. Can everybody hear?
Let's take a moment to unplug your mind. The first step to unplugging your mind is to stop everything you're doing. This begins by stopping your body and giving yourself permission to do nothing for at least a minute or so. You might try saying to yourself, just for this 1 minute, I don't have to accomplish or change anything. Now imagine that each of your 5 senses is like a door that lets information into your mind. Close each of these doors and offer yourself the gift of quiet. Your mind takes in so many sights, sounds, etc., all day long. For just a minute or so, let it rest. Close your eyes, turn off anything you were listening to. Stop distracting yourself in any way. Then, see if you can quiet your thoughts by telling your mind, you can rest now. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. Now that you've stopped and quieted your senses, come home to yourself in the present moment. Pay attention to your breathing and the sensations in your body without trying to do or change anything. Say to yourself, the present moment is my true home, and I have arrived. See if you can direct love and compassion toward yourself in this moment. Having let go of all busyness, try saying to yourself, may you be well, may you be safe, may you be loved. Finally, you recognize that everything you need to be happy is already present in this moment. You are alive, and the gift of life is infinitely precious. You can feel that your mind is completely at rest. Now, you can return to whatever you were doing and see how different it feels after having unplugged for just a little while.
All right. So usually when I do this, people have some reactions about, oh, that felt like so long, or man, I could have done that for another 20 minutes. But like I said, I like to share these so that people know that it's doable, and it can be super helpful in particular situations. So let me move, I'll move back to that other slide, but I wanted to highlight some real times that can be super useful to use the mindfulness. And so one is when wanting to focus. A lot of students assume that this means like when I want to study, but that's not necessarily the case. And so it could be focusing on anything. For sure, when you're studying, it can be helpful, but it could also be helpful when you want to devote some time to other things in your life, like your relationships, or a hobby that you've put off for a little while. And so it can be helpful when you're going into an activity that you really want to focus on or be in the present moment with, like, hey, I'm gonna go out to eat with, or go have a drink with a friend, and I don't want to be thinking about this paper that's due, or this deadline that I have coming up. I really just want to be able to be engaged and be there, with my friend. And so you can use mindfulness, these quick mindfulness things, to just basically get your brain to practice saying, hey, I know that's important, and I'm going to refocus on the present moment. And it's that refocusing that warms up those muscles to make it easier to do. Now, if you're like most other students, the time that your mind gets distracted the most is when you're studying, because sometimes, engaging in relationships, that's emotionally evoking. And so it could be easier to do. If you're like most other students, the topics and the research that you're reading can be exciting, but sometimes it's not as emotionally evoking. And so our brain gets pulled to these other areas. And so it can be really helpful to, when you are engaging in studying, or when you're about to study, to do some mindfulness so that you can practice refocusing. So I often hear from graduate students and students in general that I'll be reading something and I don't even remember the last page that I read. And I would say in those cases, there is a mindfulness exercise on our website that's just only a minute long. So as soon as you catch yourself, like, I keep getting pulled to this thought, or I keep, getting distracted, being able to stop and say, let me just practice focusing for 1 minute. That's going to warm up your brain, those muscles, in the same way that basketball players pass around and shoot before a game. They're warming up the muscles to do the thing that they want to do well. And so I strongly encourage folks to use that when they're studying, or when they find that they keep getting distracted. Just 1 minute of practicing can really help hone in on some of those muscles in your brain. The other time that can be really helpful is when you're receiving feedback. That way it's easier to kind of acknowledge the emotions that are coming in without letting them take over how the rest of your day goes, right? So like I said before, I know in grad school we do get a lot of feedback, and it's not always easy to hear. And so I think that especially in those times when you're in that circumstance, being able to take some time to just acknowledge the feelings that are coming up and practice letting go. That's another piece of mindfulness that can be incredibly helpful, is to acknowledge those emotions and let them go without judgment, especially if you're needing to go on throughout the rest of your day. And then of course, when making any sort of big decisions, because mindfulness also allows us to acknowledge the thoughts that are coming into our head and, what those might say about our values. So if you're like other students, our thoughts come up about relationships and, our careers and these things that we tend to value. And so anytime you're making a decision, it could be good to do some of that mindfulness just to kind of reflect on these different values that your brain will send you reminders about throughout the day and week in your life. So those are really important ones to consider. Let's see. So I'm gonna move on there. And the other thing, in terms of coping that I think is really important is to know, obviously you have these resources, the self-help resources, the website that I showed you today, go back and use those, but you're not alone in managing your own stress. And that's one really great thing about being at the University of Houston is that I truly believe, and your experiences may tell you different, but I truly believe that the people at this university want to see you succeed. We don't accept people into these difficult programs just so that we can fail them. We really want you to succeed, and you're not alone in doing that. So getting connected socially is super important, and so if you haven't found your community yet, definitely, I listed one up here as the Graduate and Professional Student Association. They have lots of events, gatherings, and of course, that's just one of many groups on campus and in the Houston community that you can get connected to. CAP, so I'm going to go into our resources a little bit more on the next slide. And also wanted to share with you, if you weren't aware already, about the Ombudsman service. And so this can be important when stress comes up in grad school around managing relationships, your professional relationships, or things that are going on in the classroom that you feel like are really stressful. So if you're running into problems there, if you're wanting some feedback, someone confidential who's not gonna talk with your professors about what you're saying, then that's what Dr. Sahin is here to do with graduate students. And so she'll have some information about, and advice about how to go about managing those relationships, and has really, more detailed knowledge about graduate school in general. And so there's a website with her contact information and how to get a hold of her to schedule a meeting, and some additional resources there. So I wanted to make y'all aware of that resource because I think it's incredibly important. Going through grad school, it's not just about the results that you get, but it is about the relationships that you make and how we collaborate with each other professionally. I know that the competition and comparison can run really high, but ultimately, collaboration is going to be really helpful for us in navigating those relationships and being successful. So these are your future colleagues too that you're competing with. And then the other thing I definitely wanted to make people aware of is that the graduate school in general, not just for NSM, but across the university, is having a graduate student week. So there's going to be tons of resources and opportunities to engage with other graduate students and to get more resources or have these spaces available to practice some stress relief beginning the first full week of April, which starts on the 4th. And then on April the 5th, there'll be another session just like this at noon. So I'm going to put that in the chat so that y'all are aware of that. And then just look for the communications from your own department and from the graduate school about that week, because I think they're going to have a lot of great stuff going on. Let me take a moment to tell you a little bit more about CAP's resources and why I think everybody should use Let's Talk. So I have a lot of resources here, but I wanted to start with Let's Talk consultation because I don't think people are as familiar with what it is. It's essentially informal, one-on-one, confidential conversations with a CAPS clinician. So I'm one of the Let's Talk counselors, and it can be incredibly helpful if you're having some stress to come and talk about what might be helpful for you. You know, obviously in this presentation, I gave you some tools hopefully you can implement on your own. But like I said before, with therapists, it's really important that we're looking at everybody's specific situation, the resources, the internal resources that you have, and what's going to work with you in your own circumstances. So if you're feeling like, you know, maybe I'm needing a little bit more, this is a great place to go and to ask those questions. The other thing that comes up very, very frequently in Let's Talk consultations is practicing hard conversations. So things like setting boundaries with your advisor, or you know, handling some negative feedback, or communicating with your family or your romantic partner about what your responsibilities are. Inevitably, I always get questions about, you know, should I continue in this romantic relationship? Should I, you know, things like that, where sometimes it's good to just have somebody else to talk to in a confidential setting without that worry of who's going to find out, you know, what investment does this person have? We are simply here to help you assess the situation and give you some, you know, professional guidance. And it's super helpful to go to Let's Talk because you don't have to fill out any information at all. Now, if you are interested in more ongoing counseling, which is different than consultation, then you'll want to visit CAPS between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And you can do that by walking into our Health 2 location, or just by giving us a phone call. We do all telehealth appointments as well. And so we have different psychotherapy services. You can see there, anxiety and depression workshops, regular counseling. We have couples counseling, which I also like to call communication skills building. And then of course, you know, if anybody's in crisis where they're talking about not wanting to live, having thoughts about suicide, or wanting to hurt other people, our office line also serves as a 24/7 crisis line. So if you or somebody you know is in that situation, call us up and ask for a consultation. Hey, I need help. It seems like a crisis situation. What do you think I should do? Definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us. Ask for information about how to work through something that feels really tough. So those are the services, you know, that I think can be really helpful coming from CAPS. And last but not least, you know, I showed you some of the stuff that was on our website. There's much more that you can gain there. So I have our website listed up there. And then if you have any questions at all, you can always give our office a call. Hey, you know, Marty said this in the presentation. I wanted to know more about it. How do I get connected? And then also feel free to shoot me an email. You know, you can find me on the website as well. So I'm happy to respond to emails. I'm usually pretty quick about doing that. So feel free to reach out. Other resources, you know, we're on social media sharing stuff about mental health and how to manage some of the stress that comes up in college. So I'll open it up to questions now. I also have a QR code on there so that people can scan it and give us feedback. Always wanting to improve the content that we're delivering. So feel free to enter in that. It's all anonymous. But I'll open it up to questions at this point. And or in the last 10 minutes, we could do another mindfulness if there's any requests out there for that. All right, thank you. Yeah, thanks for attending.
Thank you very much, Marty. This was really very useful, even to those who are not in grad school, are still feeling the stress. We really appreciate your coming here and spending time with us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. And like I said, you know, I know that you know, stress kind of comes and goes. So, you know, if you feel it coming again, don't hesitate to reach out for support.
Thanks. Okay, I guess if there are no questions, we'll adjourn then.
Okay, and then I'll send out the recording so that everybody has access to it. Thanks so much and have a great weekend, y'all.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
Take care.